The Winter Palace stands at the edge of the Neva River in St. Petersburg, a building so vast that it contains 1,500 rooms, 1,886 doors, 1,945 windows, and 117 staircases. Its principal facade stretches for 215 meters and rises 30 meters above Palace Square. Yet, in the late 19th and early 20th century, the man who ruled over 1/8 of the Earth's landmass and held authority over 125 million subjects occupied a private suite in the northwestern corner of the palace that was deliberately small, intimate, and, by the standards of Imperial Russia, almost modest. That man was Nicholas II, the last Tsar of Russia, who reigned from 1894 until his forced abdication in March 1917. The question is not how he spent his days at the Winter Palace, but specifically how he spent his evenings. The answer, rooted in his own detailed personal diaries, in surviving court records, and in the rooms that still stand today inside the State Hermitage Museum, reveals a world governed at every hour by ritual, hierarchy, and an unbroken sequence of obligations that continued until the moment his valet extinguished the last reading lamp for the night. Nicholas and Alexandra made the Winter Palace their primary winter residence in December 1895, the year after his accession to the throne. They lived there permanently during the winter months until the events of Bloody Sunday in January 1905, after which the family relocated to the Alexander Palace at Tsarskoye Selo and returned to the Winter Palace only for major state ceremonies and formal receptions. The period of genuine daily residence, therefore, covers roughly a decade of winter seasons in St. Petersburg, and it is to those years that this account belongs. During those winters, the couple occupied a self-contained suite on the second floor of the northwestern corner block, accessed through a separate entrance on the Saltykov staircase and deliberately isolated from the great state halls of the palace by a checkpoint room that controlled who could enter from the public side of the building. The private apartments were designed by the architect Alexander Krasovsky, commissioned in 1895 to create rooms reflecting the personal tastes of the new imperial couple rather than the grand Baroque and neoclassical style of the palace's ceremonial spaces. Krasovsky gave each room a distinct character drawn from a different historical period. The emperor's study was paneled in dark oak and furnished in the English Gothic style. The library rose 2 tiers with walnut shelving and a massive white stone fireplace. The bedroom walls were hung with English cretonne printed with red flowers and green leaves on a cream ground. The furniture throughout was made of Karelian birch. This combination was understood by those who saw it as a deliberate rejection of the gilded scale of the state rooms. It was also a statement about the nature of imperial authority itself. The more modest the domestic space of the sovereign, the clearer the separation between the man and the institution he represented. Around 5 o'clock in the afternoon, depending on the season and the nature of the evening planned, the first signal was given to prepare for dinner. In the Winter Palace, as in other imperial residences, it was the custom to give a formal warning 1 full hour before the dinner hour. The instrument used for this signal varied. Sometimes it was a gong, sometimes a large bell, in some cases a drum, and there are records of residences where a small trumpet served this purpose. Whatever the form, the effect spread through the entire household simultaneously. Dozens of people began preparing at the same moment. The wing adjutant on duty, posted in the reception room adjacent to the private apartments with the specific responsibility of remaining available to the Tsar throughout the evening, was informed of the guest list and any particular protocol requirements for that night. Footmen completed the final arrangements of the table. The kitchen building on Palace Street, a separate structure connected to the palace by an underground tunnel built in 1902, began the precisely timed sequence of preparation that would deliver each course at exactly the right interval. A tunnel had been necessary because food carried openly through the palace corridors over the distances involved lost its temperature before reaching the table. Nicholas's valet prepared his evening dress in the dressing room, connected by a small private staircase both to the emperor's study and to the valet's own room directly above. What Nicholas wore depended on whether the occasion was a family dinner without guests, a formal state dinner with the court, or a semi-formal evening with close associates. For a family dinner, he wore a military uniform. For formal occasions, he appeared in full dress uniform with his complete set of orders and decorations. Nicholas held the highest degrees of Russia's most senior imperial orders, including the Order of St. Andrew the Apostle the First Called, founded by Peter the Great in 1698, and the Order of Alexander Nevsky, as well as numerous foreign decorations. The specific set of orders displayed on a particular evening communicated both the nature of the event and the rank of those being received. Nicholas's valet was trained to know which combination was correct for each occasion, and the Tsar himself had been educated in these distinctions since childhood. Nicholas held the rank of colonel in the Russian Imperial Army, a rank he retained deliberately throughout his reign as a statement of identification with the officer class rather than elevation above it. Alexandra's preparation for the evening required considerably more time. The women of the Russian imperial court wore a standardized court dress whose form had been established by imperial decree under Nicholas I in 1834. That decree prescribed a gown of embroidered silk with an outer dress of velvet in the Muscovite style, featuring long open sleeves. The color of the velvet outer dress varied according to the wearer's rank within the court hierarchy. Court ladies were also required to wear a long ceremonial train. Only the empress and members of the immediate imperial family had the freedom to select their own colors and fabrics without restriction. Alexandra's lady's maid would begin the dressing process well before the dinner signal, working through undergarments, stays, the gown, and then the train. On evenings that required the wearing of major jewels from the Romanov treasury, including the kokoshnik tiara in the Russian style, or the large diamond parures associated with the empresses of Russia, additional time was needed simply to attach each piece correctly and securely. Alexandra was a tall woman, and her formal court dress combined with the tiara and train gave her presence at state dinners a considerable visual scale that contemporaries recorded as genuinely imposing, despite her well-known preference for private life over the formal demands of the court. Before dinner was served, guests received at the Winter Palace gathered in an adjoining reception room for the zakuski, the traditional Russian course of standing hors d'oeuvres that preceded every formal dinner. The zakuski table was not a tokened first course, but a complete spread. Multiple varieties of caviar, marinated and pickled mushrooms, salads of herrings and preserved vegetables, smoked fish, cured meats, and small open-faced preparations on dark bread. Multiple vodkas accompanied the food, each of a different character. Guests stood and moved freely through the room, while circulating footmen carried trays. Through the open doorway into the dining room, they could see the formal table already set and lit. White linen woven with imperial monograms, heavy silver from the historic court services originally collected under Catherine the Great, porcelain most commonly from the Gorbayev set, and crystal glasses marked with a Romanov coat of arms in colored enamel. The silver candelabra had been electrified by the early 1900s, and their steady light fell across flowers arranged from the imperial greenhouses. Pieces of porcelain that were cracked or imperfect in any way were removed from use and destroyed, rather than allowed to appear before the Tsar or his guests. The standard was consistently absolute, and the court officials responsible for the table knew that a visible flaw in the service was a failure of professional standing, not simply an oversight. Dinner itself was governed by rules so precise that they constituted their own formal system. No guest sat down before the Tsar took his seat. Food was presented first to Nicholas and then served outward through the table in strict order of rank. The menus were written in French, following the European Court Convention established in the 18th century. The chief cook of the imperial kitchens during this period was the French chef Cubat, supported by a Russian team trained in French methods. The first course was always a soup, typically a rich cream preparation, accompanied by small meat pies. The second was fish. The sterlet of the Dvina River prepared in champagne sauce appeared so consistently on the imperial table that it had the quality of a signature dish of the reign. After fish came chicken in complex sauces, then a course of beef, mutton, ham, or game. Wild game featured regularly. Pheasant, partridge, duck, and wild goat all appeared in season. Before the formal dessert came sweet intermediate dishes, including compotes, fresh strawberries and peaches, ice creams, and hot and cold jellies. Then came the dessert course proper. and finally coffee and small confections produced by the separate court confectionery. The men who served at these dinners were selected by the court for their height, cleanliness, physical bearing, and general appearance. They wore ceremonial livery, white tie and tails, white gloves, knee breeches, tall white stockings, and shoes with non-slip soles, since the marble floors were a genuine hazard when moving quickly with heavy trays. Only the most senior waiters were permitted to serve the Tsar and members of his family directly. These men did not belong to any specific palace, but traveled with the imperial family from residence to residence throughout the year. An account from this period concerns one of these senior waiters, an elderly man Nicholas had inherited from his father Alexander III. This waiter's eyesight was noticeably failing. Rather than dismiss him, Nicholas accommodated the problem. During the wine service, he would quietly support the old man's forearm as he poured, keeping the pour steady and preventing any error. The waiters who served at close range over many years developed an expertise in listening. Court ministers and senior officials were known to consult head waiters informally about the Tsar's mood on specific subjects, since these men overheard fragments of table conversation that formed, across years of service, a continuous record of the emperor's thinking on matters not always openly discussed elsewhere. The signal for removing a course was physical. A guest placed his cutlery on the plate and removed his hands from it, and his assigned waiter removed the plate immediately. The critical consequence of this rule was that all plates were removed the moment the Tsar completed his course, regardless of when other guests had received theirs. Since food was served outward in rank order, the guest of lowest rank received his portion last and therefore had the least time to eat before the emperor's cutlery signaled the end of the course. Nicholas appears to have been trained to pace himself with specific attention to this problem, moderating his own eating speed to give the full table a reasonable opportunity to finish. On evenings when foreign royalty or senior diplomatic representatives were present, this pacing required genuine concentration and deliberate management. After the main dinner, the gathering separated by gender, as court protocol required. Alexandra withdrew with the female guests to a drawing room where tea, coffee, and pastries were served. The men remained at table, where brandy, fresh fruit, roasted nuts, and cigars were brought. Nicholas's personal preference was for cigarettes rather than cigars, a habit maintained throughout his adult life. In the Gothic library of the private apartments, a distinctive piece of furniture stood near the fireplace specifically for this purpose. A smoking table decorated with gold and diamonds, stocked with a well-supplied selection of cigarettes and cigars for the emperor and his guests. The informal gathering of men after dinner was not simply a matter of personal comfort. It was the portion of the evening in which conversation could be frank without the constraints of the formal table, and in which the Tsar received impressions from those around him in conditions that produced more candid exchanges than any official audience could offer. On evenings when a theatrical performance had been arranged, the movement after dinner led to the Hermitage Theatre, a private court theatre built by the Italian architect Giacomo Quarenghi between 1782 and 1787 on orders from Catherine the Great. The building stands at the eastern end of the Hermitage complex, connected to the main palace block by an arched passage spanning the Winter Canal, a narrow channel known informally as the Winter Flute. Quarenghi designed the auditorium on the model of a classical Greek amphitheater, with seating arranged in a semicircular sweep, marble columns, niches holding statues of Apollo and the Muses, and bas-relief carvings depicting famous poets and musicians. The theater held approximately 280 people at capacity. This number was not a constraint but a definition. The theater was not a public venue, and access to each performance was controlled entirely by the imperial household. During the years of Nicholas's Winter Palace residence, performers who appeared there included Fyodor Chaliapin, who brought scenes from Mussorgsky's opera, Boris Godunov to this intimate stage, and Anna Pavlova, who danced in ballet productions directed by Marius Petipa. On the evening of the costume ball of February 1903, the last major ball held at the Winter Palace during Nicholas's reign, the Hermitage Theatre program included an opera concert and a performance of Tchaikovsky's Swan Lake, after which guests moved to the Pavilion Hall for dancing. Nicholas recorded his impression of that evening in a single diary sentence. He found the hall, filled with guests in 17th century Russian costumes, very beautiful. After theatrical evenings, the custom of Nicholas and Alexandra was to return to the private apartments and take a light supper in front of the study fireplace rather than return to the formal table. On evenings without a formal event, the activities in the private apartments followed a recurring pattern. Nicholas was an enthusiastic billiards player. The billiard room occupied a position in the second enfilade of his apartments, the corridor of rooms facing the Admiralty building across the garden. He played games there with his wing adjutant, the officer whose duty post was the reception room adjacent to the private apartments and who was required to remain available throughout the evening for occasions of this kind. Music was another regular occupation. The study contained a piano, and Nicholas and Alexandra often played together in the evenings, sometimes working through four-hands arrangements at the same keyboard. The diary records these sessions in the same matter-of-fact terms as any other evening event, noting the piece played alongside reports of the day's political meetings with the same even brevity. The Gothic library held the most consistent and personal part of Nicholas's private evening. The room was a two-tiered space with walnut ceiling coffers adorned with four-petal rosettes, walls covered in panels of stamped gilt leather, a massive white stone fireplace designed to suggest a medieval Gothic portal with a carved frieze, and high windows set with openwork sashes. The second level held additional bookcases along a gallery reached by an interior staircase. The emperor's desk stood directly in front of the fireplace on the lower level, and on it were small bronze busts of his grandfather Alexander II and his great-grandfather Nicholas I, alongside framed family photographs. The walls carried portraits of Romanov ancestors in historical sequence. Here Nicholas read regularly, both to himself and aloud to Alexandra. His diary notes specific sessions, Stanukovich's sea stories, the historical correspondence of Catherine the Great, and Paul Petrovich drawn from the Imperial Library, works of Count Tolstoy. Reading aloud to Alexandra appears consistently across multiple years of entries. In the same room, at the same desk, Nicholas wrote his diary each evening. He had begun keeping it at the age of 14 in 1882, starting at Gachina Palace. By the time of his reign, the archive covered 51 notebooks in an unbroken sequence from 1882 onward. He wrote in consistently spare, measured language throughout, recording political crises and family milestones alongside billiards matches and evenings at the piano with the same even brevity. The last entry was dated 30 June 1918 in the old-style calendar, 2 weeks before his execution. Adjacent to the study, connected by a private staircase, was Nicholas's marble bath, a large pool set as a rectangular recess in the floor, accessible by 9 steps, measuring approximately 387 by 385 centimeters and 159 centimeters in depth, dimensions enlarged from the original installation in 1898. The preparation of the bath was part of the final sequence of household service before the emperor retired. After the bath, the valet assisted with undressing, helped Nicholas into his nightclothes, and ensured the bedroom was in order before withdrawing from the suite. The imperial bedroom was the most domestic room in the entire private suite. Cretonne printed with red flowers and green leaves covered the walls from floor to ceiling. 2 white stucco columns in an alcove at one end defined the space where the bed stood. In front of the alcove, a large folding screen separated the bed from a small sitting area with a sofa and comfortable chairs. Wicker furniture appeared alongside the Karelian birch pieces throughout the room. The combination produced an effect of deliberate informality, entirely at odds with the ceremonial halls a few corridors away. The choice was intentional. Nicholas and Alexandra had given considerable personal attention to the decoration of their apartments, and the rejection of grand furnishings in their private rooms was a choice, not an oversight. Once Nicholas had retired, the valet withdrew and the lamp was extinguished. The palace surrounding the private apartments, however, never fully settled. The guard at the Saltykov staircase remained at his post. The Cossacks of His Majesty's own convoy, the elite guard unit formed under Nicholas I in 1828 and drawn from the noblemen of the North Caucasus, maintained their watch through the corridors throughout the night. The wing adjutant continued at his station in the adjacent reception room until formally relieved at the change of the watch. The palace commandant held administrative oversight of the building's security at all hours, and in the vast remaining space of the 1,500 rooms surrounding the small northwestern corner block, the Winter Palace continued to function at a scale that had nothing to do with the private life of any individual within it. The palace was so large that a former servant and his family, undetected by palace authorities, had at some point moved into a section of the roof and lived there for a period before being discovered. Nicholas II could extinguish his lamp and close his eyes, but the institution he represented did not rest, and the morning would bring its own unbroken sequence of obligations, exactly as the evening had carried out its own.